Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where every week I, Ivor Kovac, and my good friend Stilgar meet to discuss topics from history that the other person doesn't know about and often hasn't heard about. Today, we're also joined by our mutual friend, Great Pharaoh. So I'm going to ask these guys to begin with. Have you guys heard of Samhain?
Negative.
Nope.
I have.
But
Neither.
if I'm sure you guys have heard of Halloween.
Oh yes, of course. Almost every year. Every year. Maybe at least probably a couple times a year you hear about it. But yeah, we celebrate it once a year.
Yeah, in America, even if you can't really avoid it because
I
there's
didn't celebrate
always going to be a few
it.
people celebrating.
Yeah.
But what I want to do today is talk about the origin of Halloween because it actually stems from a very ancient custom. So originally, it was called Samhain, which is a Gaelic word, and I actually did take the time to look up the correct pronunciation on this, and I found out there were two ways of saying it. Like one is Sawin, and the other is Sahwin. I'm not really sure which is correct, but it probably varies depending on the regional dialect. So that's how I'm gonna say it. Um, and what I want to do is, if you guys, I think Stilgar knows, but the Celts originally had a great realm before the Roman Empire was created, and it was just like one city. The Celts had a great realm which stretched all the way from Ireland into what is today Russia, and they also had an enclave in Anatolia, which is mentioned in the Bible. That's Galatians. So it's
Oh,
actually a Celtic speaking region. And it seems like during the time when Paul was there, they were still not speaking Greek, but rather their indigenous language. Like if you read Acts, it mentions the language of the Galatians. So
yeah.
that was a Celtic language. So these people had a huge realm, and it also included like all of Spain, France, and most of what today would be modern day Germany. So
Cool.
the holiday of Samhain was a Celtic holiday, um, and the Celts they divided the year into two basic parts, which
Okay.
is the light half of the year and the dark half of the year, and that's very significant when people live in northern climates where it actually gets dark, and in some places it can stay completely dark all winter, and it gets frigid cold. So people that live in those kind of climates, the harvest is very important, and they have to store up food in advance because they're not going to really be able to get any when everything is covered in ice. Um, so there were four big holidays that were celebrated to mark off the change in seasons.
Okay.
There was Imbolc, which was celebrated halfway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. Beltane, which was halfway between the spring equinox and summer solstice.
Okay.
Lughnasadh, which was halfway between the summer solstice and fall equinox. And Samhain, or Samhain, which
Cool.
was halfway between the fall equinox and the winter solstice.
Cool.
And Samhain was celebrated, the celebration would start on October 31st at sundown. And that was also the beginning of the dark half of the year, the official beginning of it. And it was the end of the harvest. And what the Celts always tried to do is have the harvest completely done and brought in before the sun goes down on October 31st. Um, but that's when it began, and then it would continue through November 1st and could potentially last up to 3 days later, this celebration. Um, and it was also the beginning of the Celtic New Year. And the Celts, they conceptualized of the year as like a wheel that was constantly turning. I think the Germanic cultures did as well. Stilgar would probably know that better than me. Um, is that right, Stilgar? The Germanic cultures also did that?
They had a wheel for the times turning. I believe so, but I'd have to look that up myself to be sure, which I will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can put something in, and I'll put something in the when we find out. I'll put something in the slideshow. So there's a lot of legends, a lot of Irish legends around Samhain or Samhain. And actually, just to be clear, so the in case anyone's wondering what happened to this great Celtic realm, it wasn't an empire. It was a bunch of tribes that were related to one another and spoke related languages that were
Mhm.
probably mutually intelligible for the most part. So they weren't organized like the Romans, where they had a capital city and all that. The Romans are the mainly what uh, destroys their realm and their culture.
Mhm.
And like if you read about the Julius Caesar conquest of Gaul, that's what that's about. Is how he takes over Gaul, which was originally Celtic. And
Mhm.
most of these people that are in Spain and France today, genetically, they are for the most part descended from Celts. However, culturally, they're much they owe much more to the Romans because they were basically Romanized. And in the end, the only Celtic enclaves that still exist today as distinctive cultures is Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Brittany, which is in France. And I think
Okay.
in Spain there's a place called Galicia, but I think that the Celtic language there has finally fallen out of use. Um, so so most of the cultural developments about Samhain were done in Ireland. So I want to get into the Irish tradition here because they're the main driving force behind this. So according to Irish tradition, the god Dagda, which is the father of the Celtic gods, slept with the goddess Morrigan on the night of October 31st, just before a big battle. And Morrigan is one of the war goddesses in the Irish pantheon and represented the sovereignty of Ireland. And she was actually part of uh, a triple, like triplets, I guess. Ireland has three war goddesses that kind of handle this, and Morgan is one. The other two are Badb and Macha. And it's
Cool.
believed that every year Dagda had to sleep with Morgan on the night of October 31st in order to keep the land fertile. So this is something they thought would happen every year at sundown.
Okay.
During the night of Samhain,
Yeah.
the the word is Eos, but apparently it's pronounced East She, so I'm going to try to say it correctly. But
Okay.
the East She were able to come into the human world as portals between the different realms would open. So these portals, according to the tradition, would appear in these mounds that were burial mounds, but also mounds for other purposes which are unknown today. These
Mhm.
mounds and ruins are all over Ireland. There's actually a lot of pre-Irish ruins, remnants of forts and burial grounds from
Mhm.
whatever people group it was that preceded the Irish that used to inhabit the land first.
Mhm.
And the Irish people had all kinds of mythology and superstitions surrounding those. And one of them is that portals would open up in those, and the East She would come out of those portals on the night of the 31st. So the burial nouns are known as she, spelt Sid. They say it's she. Um, and when they're opening, you would see like a fire burning inside the mounds, or at least according to their beliefs, that's how it would be. And the East She could be seen coming in and out, going about their business in the night. And the East She were also referred to as the people of the Hollow Hills, and sometimes they're connected with the Tuatha De Danann. And I told Stilgar about them, but I don't think I mentioned it to you, Great Pharaoh. The
Right.
the Tuatha De Danann are a mythological people. According
Okay.
to Irish legend, the Tuatha De Danann were immortals who lived in Ireland, kind of like Tolkien's elves. They were immortals, and they were
Right.
people that were physically more attractive than humans. And they lived in Ireland, and then the ancestors of the Irish came from Spain, actually, in boats. And they had a fight with the Tuatha De Danann, and the Irish people won. And the treaty that they negotiated as part of the surrender was that they would split the land evenly between the Irish and the Tuatha De Danann. But it was an Irish guy who got to decide how the land was split. So according to the legend, he gave the entire surface of the land to the Irish people, and then the ground beneath the land to the Tuatha De Danann. So they became like a subterranean people, basically. And later on, they got associated with the East She. So it's kind of there's a lot of stuff in. I mean, I'm like I think 25% Irish or 20%, something like that. It's actually the biggest part of my ancestry, but I really don't know much about their legends. So this was like kind of I was kind of finding out a lot of this stuff as I go.
Yes.
So yeah, they're also referred to as fairies sometimes as well. And another thing about Samhain, there's another legend about an Irish folk hero named Fionn Mac Cumhaill, who achieves multiple victories over the East She on Samhain, though not all on the same day, but like on different Samhains over time.
Okay.
So in one account, he kills a great and powerful she called Eileen, and Eileen would come every night of October 31st and destroy the meeting place on the hill of Tara,
Okay.
which is where the ancient Irish kings and tribal leaders used to meet. It was their main meeting place, and Eileen did this for 9 years until Fionn Mac Cumhaill came and killed him. So
Okay.
those are some of the legends associated with this day, but that's not like all of them by any means. So as far as the celebration itself, in Ireland, it would begin with the Druid priests lighting fires on the Hill of Ward, which was also known as Tlachka. Tlachka. I'm probably butchering all this, but if anybody knows how to say this stuff properly, do leave a comment. So the fires, they would after the fires were lit at Tlachka, then the next place is they would be lit on the hill of Tara, which was where the kings would meet. And of course, there's actually these sites still exist today, and I was able to find images of them. They're kind of earthenworks. They were artificially constructed hills covered. They're all green and covered in grass, but they form different shapes. They're still around. You can see them. And basically, when the fire was lit on the hill of Tara, then other people would light fires throughout Ireland, and it's kind of like in Lord of the Rings, where the first fire is lit, and then the people see it like on the next tower or hill away from it, and then they light that one, and so on and so forth. So that's how the holiday would kick off. People would see the fire lit, and then they'd know it was time, and then they'd light a fire. So yeah, so so I mentioned earlier the Irish people, they thought it was extremely important to have the harvest completed and gathered in before the night of Samhain, sundown. And if they thought if they failed to do so, then the harvest might potentially be harmed by evil spirits. And prior to Samhain, people allowed their hearth fires in their houses to burn out completely, and then they would light them again when the celebration started. So I'm sorry, did somebody have a question, or I heard something?
No, not yet.
Okay. So celebration was mandatory for regular people. They would expect you to participate whether you wanted to or not. And if you didn't participate, they thought there would be some bad luck involved. And if anybody committed a crime, it would be punished severely if they committed a crime during Samhain. It could be even punished by death. And so I mentioned the fires before. After the fires are lit on the hill of Tara, then and the druid priests in the different towns would see the fire. They had the responsibility of lighting the community bonfire for the particular town. And they would also sacrifice animals. And then people would take coals from the bonfire back to their homes and light a new fire in their hearth using those coals. And yeah, druids believed that the barrier between the physical and spiritual worlds was weakened, allowing the spirits of the dead and other types of spirits to enter the world of living. So it wasn't just the Ishi that would come out in Halloween. It was also the spirits of the dead. They thought that the veil between the realms of the living and the dead was weakened on this night. And not all the spirits are friendly, according to their beliefs. And there was a lot of concern about evil dead and malevolent spirits coming for them. So to protect themselves from being abducted by unfriendly spirits, the people that were celebrating Samhain would dress up as animals and put masks on their faces, like animal head masks, basically. And I was able to find some pictures of this, obviously not from the time period, but from some reenactors. So I'll be including that. And it was also, some of them also would dress up as animals, but some might dress up like one of the Irish gods in order to seek the blessing of whatever god they were dressing up as. And the celebrations involved a good deal of drinking and gluttonous feasting. Food offerings were left out for the spirits. And there's a practice called dumb supper. And that meant like before they would sit down and have their own dinner, they would invite the spirits of the dead to join them. And they would leave not all the time, but quite often they would leave the doors and windows of their house open so that the dead could come inside. And they would leave out cakes and stuff for them to eat should they return from the grave or the afterlife. So people would also update the dead, probably ancestors most likely, about what had happened during the year. So, I don't know about you guys, but if I grew up in a culture like that, I would not have been able to go to sleep at night. Imagine your parents are like, we're going to leave the window open so your great grandfather can come inside. Like, what?
Yeah. They were spooky.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, there's a lot of this culture that has gotten into our culture, which I'll come to that in a bit. But so here's another thing they would do is they would create lanterns out of vegetables. They would carve out the inside and place a fire inside the hollowed out vegetable. And the fire represented the sun and the vegetable represented the harvest. So they were trying to bless their harvest, invoke the sun to bless the harvest by doing this. And they thought that would help the harvest last throughout the year. I guess they thought the sun god would preserve their harvest. Because again, like we live in the South and we also live in the modern times. But back then, it's a very serious issue, like the winter in Ireland and most of Northern Europe. If you ran out of food, you were going to be in some serious trouble. And most people would have to grow their own food. So what are you going to do if you don't save enough or if something happens?
Right.
So the medieval period is what comes next. And basically, the Catholic Church is expanding. And they're trying to get all the other Europeans to join the church because most of the parts of Europe that were outside of the Roman Empire are still pagan and polytheistic cultures. So the Catholic Church is trying to get all these people to join. Like when it came to the Germanic cultures that came and ransacked the Western Roman Empire, it was like absolutely imperative that they join the Catholic Church for the sake of survival. And we talked about that some in other videos, because you had to do something to stop them from ransacking everything. And so the Catholic Church doesn't have, in the early days, doesn't have the ability to just force it on people like the Muslim conquest did. So they have to try and persuade. And there was a pope named Pope Gregory I, also known as the Great, and he presided over the Catholic Church from 590 AD to six. Well, obviously it's going to be AD 590 to 604. And his recommendation was that missionaries going into these pagan realms, they would, rather than telling the different pagans to stop celebrating their holidays and rituals, just try and tweak them so that and try to put like a more Christian spin on them, and also to take like the sites of pagan temples and stuff, and rather than destroy them, just try to turn it into a church. And there's some other parts of Europe, there's some missionaries that would do things like smash the idols, and then they would end up getting smashed up themselves, because people would be offended by that. So that was his policy, was to kind of absorb this stuff and repurpose it rather than just tell people to stop. And that was the main policy for the Catholic missionaries that were trying to convert the British Isles. And in the 7th century, Pope Boniface IV establishes something called All Saints' Day. And the purpose of that is to celebrate saints who don't have a special holiday of their own. And originally, they had put All Saints' Day on May 13th. And the purpose of that was to kind of absorb another pagan holiday that the Romans were doing. I think it was called Lemuria, something like that. And but the point is, like, this holiday is already set up. So then in the 8th century, there's another pope named Gregory III. And what he does is he moves All Saints' Day to November 1st, right down, and sets it right down on top of Samhain, because they want to get the Irish, they want to try to sanitize this holiday and get the Irish to, if not stop, at least change what they're doing. So then what happens, though, is the night of October 31st, they start referring it to as All Hallows Eve, which is where our current name of Halloween comes from. Like, if you look at Halloween, it's kind of a portmanteau between Hallows and Samhain. So that's probably how it came to be like that. And so the Irish, they continue to celebrate this holiday, but under a different name. And under the influence of the Catholic Church, they attach some slightly different significance to it. So have you guys heard of Stingy Jack?
No.
Still
Never
gone?
heard it. No.
Yeah, I never heard of it either before I did the research for this topic, but it's something that actually really affects us here in the United States.
What gets me is still how it still is coming to America. How you get the whole society as a whole. How did it survive all these years to where we're celebrating it every year? That's what gets me.
Yeah, that's a good question, Great Pharaoh. Actually, there is a very simple answer for why it came to the United States and how it became ubiquitous, but the why it continues is anybody's guess. But I'm actually going to come to that in a bit, because
I mean, it's considered if I'm not mistaken. Well, it's not considered officially a national holiday, but it is practiced all over this country.
Yeah, it's practiced all over this country.
It's just not official. That's all.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. It's practiced all over this country, and most people don't really know why they're doing it or where it comes from. Which some people in my neighborhood, in fact, they go really, really crazy over it, like putting out decorations like I've never seen before. So I wanted to kind of get this information out, so people would know what it is that they're celebrating and how it came to the United States. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I will answer that thoroughly, but that's actually I'm getting to that. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, but good question though. Now I'll answer it for sure. So, the legend of Stingy Jack is this. It's like a medieval legend, I guess, late Middle Ages, about a guy named Stingy Jack who was a drunkard and also very greedy. And according to the legend, Satan comes to claim him and take him to hell. And Stingy Jack says, "Before you take me to hell, can I just have one more drink?" And Satan says, "All right, sure. I don't see why not." So he goes to the bar with Satan, and he says, "Oh, I don't have any money to pay for the drink. Can you help me?" So Satan turns into a coin so that Stingy Jack can pay for his beer or whatever he's going to drink. And then Stingy Jack drinks the beer, but he keeps the coin, and he puts like the Satan coin into his pocket where there's a crucifix. And when the coin touches the crucifix, Satan is trapped in that form, and he cannot leave. So Stingy Jack says, "I'll only let you go if you promise to give me 10 more years. You got to leave me alone for 10 years." And Satan agrees, and Stingy Jack lets him go. And then 10 years later, Satan returns for Stingy Jack, and he says it's time. And Stingy Jack says, "Okay, but I'm really, really old. Can you get me a walking stick? I can barely walk." And Satan says, "Sure." And he goes up into the tree. And then I've seen some different versions of the story, but Stingy Jack, in one version, he puts crucifixes all around the base of the tree. And in another one, he carves a cross into the side of the tree. And Satan cannot get down. And Stingy Jack says, "I'll only let you down if you promise to leave me alone forever. I don't want to go to hell." And Satan agrees. And so he lets him down. And then Stingy Jack continues on and eventually dies anyways. And when he dies, he's not allowed to go into heaven because he's greedy and drunk. And so he tries to go to hell. And because of his earlier agreement with Satan, he can't go to hell. So his spirit wanders the earth, and he carries one of the old vegetable lanterns with a burning coal inside of it. He walks through the darkness of the night, and he came to be known as Jack of the Lantern, which eventually was shortened to Jack-o'-lantern.
That's where that.
Yeah, that's where that came from, right? Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And the Irish, the original jack-o'-lanterns were not made with pumpkins. Pumpkins are not indigenous to Europe. They were made with like turnips and rutabagas. I think it was rutabagas.
Yeah.
But I do have some images of that, and in some places like Scotland and Ireland, they still use those materials. So the practice of bonfires, lighting bonfires on Halloween, still continues. And then there's another practice that starts called guising. Well, in Scotland, it's called guising, and in Ireland, it's called mumming. And this takes the place of leaving food out for the dead. So what is guising? Well, after the harvest, young men who are not married would put on disguises and go house to house asking for gifts for the dead. So it's kind of like the forerunner to trick-or-treating. And in Scotland, these guys were referred to as geezers. Kind of interesting because when I was a kid, a geezer like meant somebody that's really old, like an old man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then in Ireland, it's called mumming, and in that again, like people would put on costumes and go door to door. But in Ireland, they're going to sing songs for the dead on your doorstep in exchange for cakes. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right?
Well, that's how you have the trick or treat now.
Yeah, in America, it becomes the trick or treat. So you had asked, like, how did it spread through America? So, in the 1800s, there was a lot of immigration from Ireland. Like Irish people were kind of the Mexicans of the 1800s. Like so many of them would come. They were the main people that would be used for cheap labor in farms and in factories and in mines. And there was a big, huge surge of Irish immigration to the United States. when Ireland got hit with the potato famine that lasted from 1845 to 1849. But
Yeah.
of course, the Irish immigration doesn't end with that, it continues. And during the Civil War that was going on, Irish people were still showing up in large numbers to this country. And when they would show up, sometimes they would just get drafted right off the boat to fight for the Union or to fight for the Confederacy. And sometimes, like, the same family might be split, that some are fighting for the Union and some are fighting for the Confederacy. So they continue to celebrate Halloween when they come to the United States. And I have an article that was written in 1884 from a magazine called The Christian Work. Just wanted to read some of it to you guys. So this was when Halloween started to become ubiquitous, and Americans were like, what is this that's happening? And it was very popular with young people. So here I'll read some of the article. Now that our maturing nation is awakening more and more to the value of holidays, merrymakings, and an appreciation of wholesome jollity, there springs into recognition and observance some peculiar days which have only recently been specially noticed. There are those of us whose hair is merely sprinkled with gray, who in childhood only heard of All Saints' Day and Halloween as a vague mention, hinting at some far-off mystic association with which our age had nothing to do. But lo, to our blithesome sons and precious young people, count among the festive occasions of the golden autumn the Halloween party, and forthwith it establishes itself as another gleesome anniversary of the calendar. Uh, and we are glad of it. The sad old earth retains what youthfulness it can claim through the redeeming and rejuvenating influence of the youth, perpetually attaining years when the out-bubbling joy and pleasing glamour of social attractions, if not carried too far, form delightful pastime for the present, and become encircled by a halo of brightness, still, when recalled some amount of years, I can't read that number, of retrospection. And it kind of is actually kind of a rambling article, but basically, they don't really know what it is. They're calling it All Hallows Eve. They actually thought that it was um, a Catholic holiday, which, I mean, All Hallows Eve technically was, but it didn't start that way. And I'll post a link to the article if anybody wants to read the whole thing. It's kind of wordy, even for me. But there's another part here that, let's see here, that Halloween, the last night of October, and consequently the eve of All Saints' Day, was superstitiously regarded by the English and Scotch, and especially by the Scottish peasantry, as a time when witches, evil spirits, and all mischief-brewing sprites went forth on dark and mysterious midnight revels. Why such baneful agencies should leap into action on the eve of so highly commemorative a day does not appear. But we read that fairies also held high carnival on this mystic night, and it can only be inferred that with all their eerie and gruesome love of the supernatural, the brawny, sinewy, brave, and bony Scots chose rather to favor the blithesome sports of fairies than to brew dark plots with the spirits of evil. So they didn't quite know, like as this thing became widespread, they didn't really quite know where it came from and what it was about. The association with the dead and the spirits of the dead was very, very ancient, before Christianity even existed in any form. This is how the Celts were celebrating. So people in America really didn't know what this was, where it was coming from, why people are dressing up like witches and things. But yeah, it spreads throughout America, and of course, once the Irish people get here, they discover that pumpkins are bigger and better than turnips. You can carve a bigger face on them, and they start using those. And mumming and guising morphs into trick or treating over time. And there's also Halloween is used as an excuse by young people to kind of run wild and loose, and that people would get their homes vandalized and their gardens. And so this would happen every year once Halloween became ubiquitous. And it's going to continue up into the 20th century. So every Halloween night, there'd be some vandalism that would go on. In Hiawatha, Kansas, there's a woman named Elizabeth Krebs. And in 1912, she just got fed up with having her garden and her town vandalized every year by children wearing masks. So every Halloween, these kids running around with masks would be wrecking her garden and vandalizing buildings and such. So she decides she's going to try to stop it. And in 1913, she tries to stop it by organizing a party for the children on Halloween. But it doesn't work. Not everybody comes to the party, and her garden gets wrecked again, as well as the town. So in 1914, she organizes a much larger event, which does involve the entire town, and it includes a parade and costume party. And that actually makes the vandalization stop because all the kids are involved in that instead of running around wild and loose. And then the news of her success spreads, and other towns across the United States begin to imitate. And now, trick or treating still goes on, but for the most part, there's no vandalization. Although, when I was a kid, and this is anecdotal, the neighborhood that I was living in, people would put out pumpkins. And then other people would go around and smash the pumpkins on Halloween night, like either before or after the trick or treating was going on. So, like the next day, it was pretty common to find smashed up pumpkins in the gutter, along the edges of the streets.
Is that how they started the band, Smashing Pumpkins?
I think so. I actually think I don't know that for a fact, but I suspect
Pretty
that's
sure
what.
that's where that's coming from.
Yeah, smashing pumpkins probably had to do with people literally smashing the pumpkins, on Halloween night. And
Hey,
The poor pumpkins. What did the pumpkins ever do to them? Poor pumpkins. Like,
yeah,
I was just looking into because Halloween is now also becoming mainstream here because of the Americanization of our culture.
yeah.
But in my youth, it was not a thing at all, and we had Saint Martin, and which was similar. And you actually you walked around and you were collecting candy, and you had like it was based on Saint Martin. It was on the November 11th, and you would make a lampoon and walk around and collect candy around the doors. And I think that's mostly gone now. Mostly it's now Halloween, which admittedly is actually more fun. But I was reading up on Saint Martin as you were talking, and that's a Frankish tradition. And apparently, if you go down the Rhine, you have pelts, Märtel, which is a gift bringer, and pelts is German for hitting, and that means there is also um, mischief involved. And if you go further down, he turns into Belschnickel, and then all the way in Austria, he is Krampus. So he's the evil companion of Santa. So and that's also where you have the masks and dressing up in the suit with like a demon type of mask. So maybe there's some Germanic influence on Halloween as well.
Well, I mean, yeah, it could be. Or it could also be like one thing that I've kind of noticed is that a lot of our ancestors seriously believe, especially Irish people, and they seriously believed that we share this world with one or more other sentient species. They thought there were things in the woods, and like Europe in particular, before the time of the Romans, it was mostly forest, and so people attached, stuff to the forest. Like they thought that there were other beings living there, and Tolkien, he actually took some inspiration from this. Like I've noticed, the more I've learned about Irish legend, I know by his own admission he was mainly inspired by Germanic and also Finnish mythology. But I've also seen a lot of parallels between his work and Irish mythology. Um, like for example, when Galadriel talks about what's going to happen if we don't go back to Valinor, we're gonna fade, and we're gonna have to become a people of the woods and hills and caves. Well, that's what happened to the Tuatha De Danann, and in the older version of uh, the Silmarillion, which was originally called the Lost Tales, there was a group of elves called the Danann, um, and he also included other things, like he worked in the Voyage of Saint Brendan, but he repurposed it where Saint Brendan, the Isle of Birds, is actually like Toleracia. But yeah, it's kind of one thing I've noticed about Irish mythology. I haven't read that much Irish literature. I read Voyage of Saint Brendan, and I read another story that was translated into English by actually Isaac Asimov, um, and then just a few other bits and pieces of things. It seems like in their culture, even after the Catholic Church took over, um, they don't just have good and evil. They have like good, evil, and neutral. So, like in Saint Brendan, when he goes to the Isle of Birds, the birds that are there on this island, he sees this tree and it's covered in these white birds, and they come and talk to him and they tell him that they were angels in heaven. That when Satan and his angels rebelled against God, these guys didn't pick a side. They stayed neutral, so God cast them out of heaven. And then another story I read, they're dealing with some kind of small people. I want to say fairies, but I don't know if that's right. Um, and basically, the small group, maybe pixies. I can't remember what it was, but the story behind them was that they were originally angels in heaven, and they were supposed to be guarding the city, but like the city of God or whatever. And when Satan and his demons attacked, these guys weren't at their post, so God threw them out, and they ended up being relegated to the earth. They're not allowed into either heaven or hell. And of course, the same thing with Stingy Jack. Like, he's wandering the earth too. He can't go to heaven or hell. So it's kind of an interesting culture, and I can see how deeply it's influenced the modern American culture. I think that like if you look at Halloween now, still, the idea of the dead coming back is pretty much everywhere. Like, people put these fake ghosts and things and witches in front of their houses and skeletons. And I'm not completely sure, but I would bet you that um, the concept of the zombie movies where the dead rise up, that probably it also has its origins in Irish folklore, because that's why they wore they dressed one of the reasons why they dressed up like animals on Samhain was so that the evil dead would not take them. They might come and they'd be like, oh, that's just an animal, and continue on. So yeah, it seems like they added a lot to our culture, for better or worse. And actually, one thing I know is during the 1800s, there was a fair bit of prejudice against the Irish immigrants. And you guys know about like the melting pot, right? The analogy where they say America is multiple
Yeah.
nations
Mm-hmm.
coming together, melting together into a new culture, the melting pot.
Mm-hmm.
They actually thought that the Irish were an incompatible culture that could not be assimilated. And so there's a political cartoon from the 1800s, which I'll put in the slideshow, but basically they illustrated the melting pot, and the pot is full of all these different guys from different countries, and there's even a black guy in it. And Columbia, which is like kind of the female version of Uncle Sam, is stirring the pot. But then there's an Irish guy, like dressed in stereotypical fashion, like a leprechaun and everything, and he's carrying a knife and he's like jumping out of the pot. And the text of the cartoon is like the ingredient that can't be the ingredient that won't mix, or something like that. But of course, they did mix into the population, and I've seen surveys where people say that, oh, there's more people in America that identify as Irish than there are people in Ireland. And so the article, like I read one article where they were kind of mocking that and making fun of it, like, oh, Americans are so stupid, and they're not really Irish, which is true now. But what happened is there were so many of these people that came, they didn't just stop doing all the things that they were doing. They blended into the general population. So when somebody says, like, I've got Irish ancestry, it's usually like a great grandfather or a great great, or maybe a great great on one side and a great on another side. Um, and other things, that have come to us from Ireland is St. Patrick's Day, which of course in America is like a meme. It's like a joke compared with. I don't really know what they do in Ireland for St. Patrick's Day. I know here it's just like an excuse for people to drink and then wear green. And also Halloween comes from there. So anyway, I'm just kind of yeah, you can still see some parallels. Most people that celebrate Halloween, they have no idea what the roots of it are. In that article that I read earlier, they didn't even know. But Halloween should not be confused with. So originally it was a fall festival. And if anybody is new to America or just maybe not in America, but seeing what's going on overseas, it can be kind of confusing because we have Halloween where they put out jack-o'-lanterns, but then there's also Thanksgiving where people just put out like pumpkins and corn and things like that. So the way you tell it apart is if it's for Halloween, it's going to be carved. If it's just a basic pumpkin that hasn't had anything done to it, and maybe like a hay bale or some squash or something like that, then they're just celebrating the fall. And Thanksgiving is the first American holiday. It was celebrated before Halloween even came here. And of course, that was also a harvest celebration, but it has more Christian roots where people thanked God that they didn't starve to death, for the first time since coming here, basically. It'd be confusing for maybe somebody that doesn't understand, but basically that's what it is. And oh yeah, Wiccans, they still attach a lot of importance to Halloween. When I was growing up, I didn't really celebrate Halloween. My parents allowed us to celebrate it like once or twice, and we actually carved pumpkins. And then they basically decided, Halloween is not a clean holiday. We're not going to celebrate it. So we stopped. And of course, I never celebrated it with my kids. My oldest son, he asked me a little bit ago if Halloween was Satan's birthday. And I'm like, no, it's not Satan's birthday, but it is focused on like spirits and mischievous things. So I know some churches, like mostly when I was growing up, they were like, we don't celebrate Halloween. It's an unclean holiday and such. It's evil. But then at the same time, sometimes what they would do is host a celebration at the church, and they would say, come and dress up and get candy, and they give the kids like bags of candy, and they would say dress up in whatever costume, but don't put on anything evil, like no undead, no witches, no demons, So and the reason, of course, they're doing that is to stop the kids from otherwise going out and trick-or-treating. Also back in the 80s, I don't know if this is true or not, but there was a big scare that some people were putting like needles and razor blades and drugs into the candy. So back then, parents that were concerned, they would take the candy and like look at it carefully to make sure nothing was punctured, or they might tell their kids to only go to certain houses of people that they know. And I haven't seen any pumpkins get smashed in a long time. And my guess is because when I was a kid, the people that were smashing pumpkins were probably all like Gen X, and millennials, our generation, apart from us three guys, like most of the millennials, they're more sensitive than the generations that came before. Imagine like if you were to go and smash one of their pumpkins today, they'd probably call the police and accuse you of racism or something. So, at any rate, that's all I've got. You
I'm
guys,
totally up for smashing some pumpkins, just so you know.
you want you're gonna smash a pumpkin?
Yeah, I'll come over next Halloween and smash some pumpkins with you guys if you're up for it.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
uh,
I even though I don't approve of celebrating Halloween, I also don't really want to. I don't really want to touch somebody else's property. Even though it's like I never did that. I'm kind of like non-aggression principle kind of thing. So
I did, but we have a different party for that, where you stay up all night and then but you don't do anything crazy. Like, basically, it's like you would steal like somebody's garden gnome and put it in somebody else's yard, stuff like that. Nothing too
oh
crazy. Yeah.
yeah, mischievous
Yeah.
prank.
Yeah. Yeah. No
Yeah.
real vandalism. No.
What about you, Great Pharaoh? What is the Coptic Church reaction to Halloween? Do you guys ever talk about it there? You get disconnected?
No, he's still there. He might be on mute.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if he's. It says escrow. I think he got disconnected.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here in Holland, we were doing a lot of Halloween nowadays, and we did celebrate it in the neighborhood this year as well. And yeah, people dressed up and stuff and got candy. And over here, I think the adults like it more than anything. Like, they built like one of the alleyways. They turn it completely dark. Some of my neighbors, and they put in a smoke machine. And then the kids were walking through it, and they were like performing some real jump scares with some horror masks on, which is yeah, I don't know. I thought it was pretty funny, but I don't know.
One thing that's always baffled me about Halloween is, I mean, I know the roots and origins of everything now, but like as an individual, why would you want to put skeletons and zombies and different kinds of monsters in your front yard? I mean, I know it's all fake and it's all decoration, but what if that stuff was real? Would you still be like happy about it, or would you run away screaming?
I think it's similar to like going into like an attraction. What do you call it? Like a roller coaster.
Uh,
Like, if the roller coaster, if you knew that that thing was going to smash into a wall at the end, you wouldn't be enjoying the ride. The
yeah.
only reason you're enjoying it is because it's scary, but it's safe. I wouldn't say perfectly safe, but it's pretty darn safe. Nothing is going to happen to you. So I think people just enjoy the scary and the spooky feeling, knowing that it's not really a threat. So I think that's the main attraction to it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't take it too seriously. I don't believe in, that there's like evil stuff coming around. And but I know that some people go very crazy with like chainsaws and all kinds of things, which I think is also kind of silly as well. But anyway, for the kids, I think it's a pretty, yeah, I don't know. I don't think too much about it.
yeah, I tend to think about stuff whether I want to or not. Um, and what I usually do for Halloween is I usually try to leave so that that I won't have to deal with trick or treaters. 'Cause I never keep candy in my house anyways either. Um, and I don't have anything to give them even if I wanted to. So I usually just leave because I don't want to participate in it, but I also don't want to, be what's the word, antisocial necessarily. Another thing you can do is just like turn the lights off in the front of your house, and then they'll think you're not
Yeah, and
home.
then they'll leave you alone. They did the same thing here, and I also think the whole just getting candy is kind of silly. And here in the like in my neighborhood, they were doing games. They had like different kind of games set up in the street for the kids to try, like ball games and stuff like that, and then they could win candy. So, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, but yeah, I think the great pharaoh just resurrected
Yes.
from his
I,
crypt.
yeah. More or less, yes.
So
Yeah.
what do you guys do Halloween in the Coptic church
We
or within Egypt or yeah?
we took a conservative approach. They told us, you can dress up, but you cannot dress up like these hideous creatures. You know,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
they did in church and stuff because they didn't like this these types of habits, these funny games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know if you heard earlier, but I was mentioning like a lot of churches they would do that. Like the church I went to as a kid, they would have like a Halloween festival on Halloween night where they would tell you to come put on a costume, but not anything evil, and like you could come get a bag of candy. And basically, their purpose was to have you there instead of running around trick or treating. So
Yeah, which is also why I think why they turned the tradition into All Saints, right? And they
well, they
transformed it
they
yeah,
into
tried
all.
to, right? They didn't really
Yeah.
succeed very well.
No, yeah.
Trying to sanitize something that
Well,
really
people
cannot be.
don't do the Samhain anymore, where they get drunk for 6 days or sometimes up to a month,
Yeah.
and eat tons of pork and have orgies and whatnot. I don't know about the orgies part, to be honest, but yeah, I mean that's no longer the case, at least. Yeah.
Some people still get drunk though. I mean,
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess so. Now part of the Halloween tradition, it survives on. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, dude. Well, right on, man. I mean, it's very fascinating, and I like I said, the fact that it's made it this far along is unbelievable.
yeah, I think one of
What?
the reasons it persists is because there's so much money in it. Like corporations, they can sell all this costume and stuff, and people
Oh
come
yeah,
buy it. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
and
I'm
I
sure
think
Amazon.
kids like candy. So
yeah. I know that's not going to go
yeah.
anything with that. You better believe that. Huh.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, guys, I think
we
I'm
don't.
going to have
Oh,
to get going.
Yeah.
all
You
Yeah,
right.
know,
man.
but
Appreciate it.
definitely, it was awesome, guys. It's an awesome topic. We'll get a chance to speak more. Maybe not necessarily during the broadcast, but we'll get in touch soon, perhaps. Okay.
All right.
Okay. All right.
Well, thanks.
Awesome, guys.
Sounds good. All right, man. Talk to you guys in the next one.
See you.
See you.
Take care.